I'll give you a
Great.
cutting,
Okay. Before I say anything else, I've got. I thought it was a smoker's cough, but I found out yesterday it's a chest infection. So that's why I'm on this mic, because I can step away from it to have a horrible coughing fit. So I apologise ahead of time. Yeah, it's weird when Lisa says all those different things. And actually, what I'm going to do is explain kind of where I am with my career, how I got there. I'll talk maybe for about 45 minutes, I've got my clock, and then take questions. And it is quite an odd sounding career that I have. About 2 years ago, I kept saying to people, this is what I do. And I just kept seeing these kind of looks of confusion. So what I did, I mean, it's partly because I have a massive ego, which you have to be a radio presenter. I made myself a website. So on my website, I have the sections that all make perfect sense to me, that confuse lots of people. So I have my radio presenting thing. I have my TV writing thing. I also write plays as well. So I've got a section for that. Excuse me. And I've also got a section for all my newspaper stuff. Now, for me, it all makes perfect sense. It all links. It's all just telling stories. And I don't really understand why people struggle with that. Because essentially, that's what we are. We're storytellers. The mistake that we sometimes make is thinking that our stories are the most important ones. And you know, if you're a columnist or a radio presenter, you've got to share your own stories. But actually, our job is to find much better stories than we have ourselves. Everyone's got one. And it's in the telling of the stories. It's in the finding out of the stories. The stuff that you do, you're learning how to get those stories and then how to tell them. So my story. Excuse me. Oh, that's rock. So, how did it all connect? Back to the start. Lisa was just asking me about my first job. I did a degree in theology, and after I graduated, I went home and I realised that theology doesn't really qualify you for anything. And I was a bit stuck. And my mum, this is absolutely true, my mum wrote to the Keithley News and said, she essentially said, my son's a pain in the arse, he won't do anything, will you take him for work experience? And so that's how I got my work experience at the Keithley News, which I loved, and I love to this day the Keithley News. So I went along and I did a week of work experience, and at the end of my first week, I had a column with my picture next to it. Because it's a small paper, and I will come to the opportunities you get working for smaller papers. And that was it. I just knew, kind of seeing my picture in the paper, but more writing the stuff that I'd written. I'd written a column about what it's like to go to university and what your first week is like. And I just knew that was it. I knew I was going to be a journalist. So I applied to a course in Hastings, did my postgrad down there, and I got... Sorry. I got lots of interviews, so I was self-funded, and on the course we had people that had been sponsored by the Times, the Financial Times, by local newspapers, and there were about 4 of us that had paid for our own course. And so I kept getting these interviews, and the other guys got jobs, and I wasn't getting an interview, and my course leader, who was a right hard nut, I'm cleaning up my language for some reason, you're all journalists. No? All right. Right hard bastard. Imagine Lisa, but worse. And she rang one of these editors and said, what is he doing in these interviews? Why is no one giving him a job? And what I was saying was, so I'd go in and people would say to me, why did you do theology? And I'd kind of go, well, I'm sort of a Muslim and my mum's Christian, but I was raised a Catholic, and it transpires that they all thought that journalism was a phase that I was going through. So my next interview at the Wiltshire Gazette and Herald, they said, why did you study theology? And I said, oh, well, theology is about people, and it's about stories, and that's what I want to... Anyway, I got the job at the Wiltshire Gazette and Herald. So, day one, I didn't know where Wiltshire was. My course tutor gave me a right bollocking, because that was one of the reasons I hadn't applied to Wiltshire, so she made me go find Wiltshire on a map. For those that don't know, it's below, you all know, it's below Oxford. It's miles away from where I wanted to be. I wanted to be at the Yorkshire Post. I wanted to come home and be here in Yorkshire. So I arrived day one. I left journalism school on the Friday, packed everything into my Fiat that had no heater and no tape player, and stayed in B&B for the first 3 days. Day one, I arrive. Just the most exciting moment of my career. It was amazing. And I met Oliver. Oliver was the main reporter for the Wiltshire Gazette and Herald. And then I discovered that Oliver was leaving the next day. And I said, well, who's going to, who's going to show me the way? Who's going to be my teacher? And it transpired that I was to be my own teacher. The Wiltshire Gazette and Herald, and I've got a copy of it, is a broadsheet, a weekly broadsheet. It came out every Thursday, and we had about 5 different editions. So for the front page, we had, my time was called Devises. So I had a page 3 to fill, and a front page story to find. And I had a day and a half to do it, and I'd graduated the week before. I shit myself. and it was the best training that I could possibly have had, because I just got thrown in at the deep end. And I filled page 3, and I genuinely still don't know how I did it. And it got to Wednesday morning, and there was a story that we'd heard that had happened overnight. A woman had slit her wrists, and she climbed on top of her house. And the police had gone, and they'd managed to talk her down. And I was like, oh, this is an amazing story. I think it might have come off the police lines or something. And my editor said to me, get an interview with the copper that talked her down. So I spent maybe an hour ringing around, and the deadline was getting closer. I think 1 o'clock in the afternoon was the deadline. So I'm making all these phone calls. I'm getting beaten back. I'd been in Wiltshire for 4 days. Nobody knew who I was. And eventually, I admitted defeat, and I went to my editor. By the way, I should have said, I'm just going to tell you the story of what I've done, but I think there are kind of important lessons, and I don't know what they are. If we come across them, I might highlight them. And I think there is one coming up in this little story. So I go to the editor, and I say, I'm really sorry, but I've done my best. I can't get the interview. And I thought, my mum and dad always said, you can only try your best. That's all you can do, Nicholas. So lesson 1 is that's bullshit. Don't try your best, get the story. Because my editor sent me back out, and I now have about half an hour. And I'm thinking, I literally have, what do I do here? So I went to the pub, which isn't, I didn't just go for a drink. I went to the pub because I'd been the night before, and the pub landlord I happened to know. So I got chatting to the pub landlord, because that's what you have to do when you arrive in your patch. And he had all the coppers used to go drinking there, and he had the mobile number of the copper that I needed to speak to. So I got the story, I took the notes down, and I now have about 10 minutes to write the piece. So I say to my editor, look, I've got it, but I can't, you know, I've got at least an hour to write this thing. And I had done the whole thing that I'm sure you lot have done, the exercise where there's a rolling story and you've got to update it and all that. And he said to me, and I'm not making this up, and this was 3 days into being a journalist, we're holding the front page. And you know that moment when I said I saw my story in the Keithley News? That was the moment I was like, this is it. Journalism is brilliant. And they held the front page. And I've been at my dad's house this morning, and I can't find my front page. And I'm gutted, because when I've done talks like this, I kind of leave you in suspense and then show you the front page. But I did get the story. It did go on the front page. I don't have the paper with me. So I guess lesson 1 is, don't try your hardest. Just get the story. There are no excuses. Yeah. Anyway, I've got another very important lesson for you, and this is a real one. Make sure you date your notebooks. And for those broadcast people, keep some kind of record. I still don't do it today, but I probably should. So, I'm in Wiltshire, and the brilliant thing about being in the Wiltshire Gazette and Herald and having a page 3 and a front page every week is that I had a page 3 and a front page every week. When you go to bigger newspapers, when you go into bigger newsrooms, you're going to be you're going to be competing with your colleagues to get that front page story. Whereas I already knew that I had the front page every week. And it didn't make me complacent. It meant that I still had to get the best story that I would have hoped would go on the front page were I a national competing with other people. But it gave me an opportunity to actually write stuff and have stuff published. I don't know if this is apocryphal or not, but I've heard of people working on things like the New York Times, and you've missed the best bit, and and they write for years and don't get anything published, and I can't think of anything that would be gut-wrenching to do that. But if you're at a smaller newspaper, you have a chance, and it is the whole big fish, little pond thing, yeah, but you have an opportunity to actually write, and nothing will teach you. It's kind of like watching, because I do this as well, it's like watching your plays in front of an audience. It's lovely when you hear actors read it, and you can imagine it all you like, but once you're in front of an audience, that's when you can kind of hear whether your script works or not. Similarly, having your stuff in print, you see all the mistakes. by God, do you see the mistakes? And so, aim high, aim to be at the Nationals. At the minute, my journey's not stopped. I'm trying to get onto Radio 2. My editor last week said to me, "You're not famous, you won't go on Radio 2." And I said, "So let's make me famous." Genuinely, you've got to keep aspiring, but don't discard the Keighley News or the Ilkley Gazette, which didn't give me a job, or the TNA, which also didn't give me a job. You know, don't look for the opportunities to make your mark. So, I was making my mark. I was in Wiltshire Gazette and Herald. Court stories, how are we doing for time? Court stories are brilliant. And I've been trying to find this thing. Again, I can't bloody find it. You really do keep records much better than I do. Courts are brilliant places to get stories. One of my favourite court stories was, so at the end of my first year, you go go back to your college and you have to put your portfolio together. And they said to me, this is probably one of the densest intros I've ever seen, because your intro is 25 words, you've got to get every bit of the story in, blah, blah, blah. So the story that inspired this comment, the first bit of praise I'd ever had from my course leader, was the guy that created Roy of the Rovers obviously made a lot of money. He bought a pub. He also, he didn't buy, he got a very much younger, a very beautiful wife. And that wife died. She had a brain tumour, and he woke up in bed next to her, and she was dead one morning. And he started drinking in his own pub. And one night he was caught drink driving. So I'm sitting in court getting this story, kind of going, right. So I've got to get the creator of the Roy of the Rovers, this tragic death of this beautiful young woman, the guy that bought the pub who's been caught drink driving. And it was just, I somehow managed to get it all in the intro, but it was a brilliant story. Court stories are brilliant, but you've got to be a bit careful with them. Because I also did a story about a woman had left her 2-year-old kid at home, and she was basically being prosecuted for neglect. And I did the story, and it seemed fine, and I was, you know, carrying on working, and then we got a letter from the lawyers, and it was the first time I'd been sued. I've been sued about 7 or 8 times since, and it's fine. It's fine. There's an actor who, anyway, it's fine. Anyway, so we get this letter, and they're essentially contesting my piece, and it seemed we're going to get sued. And the one sentence, and I still don't really understand why this was, but there was one sentence in my copy that said something about a neighbour having a key to the house. But we're fine, because I knew I had that in court. I have my 100 words a minute shorthand. It's admissible. I'm fine. But I hadn't dated my notebooks. And to cut a very long story short, at 4 a.m, I'm in the Wiltshire Gazette and Herald offices. The cleaner's arrived. He's kind of going, "What are you doing here?" And I managed eventually to find the notebook in a pile of maybe 40, 50 notebooks. The one quote that saved my arse and stopped us from getting sued, and it was the line that said that, and I didn't write it, I didn't go back and put it in, it was the line that said the neighbour had a key. So just a very quick lesson there. Date your notebooks. But also, the reason I tell that story is because it was 4 a.m. and I was in the Wiltshire Gazette and Herald, and you might think, is there anything further away from Fleet Street? But that's not true. It was so exciting. I went to parish council meetings, which you will want to smash your head against a brick wall. But I was there. I was kind of doing my version of the House of Cards. Now, clearly, you know, I'm not in the corridors of power. I'm in Devizes Parish Council. But you make of it what you will, and if you get excited, and that is actually one of my biggest things. And I know that, perhaps even more so now, we're supposed to look at life through an ironic sneer, and I'm not ironic at all. I'm an enthusiast. I'm really enthusiastic about being on the radio, about getting... I'm enthusiastic about all the stuff that I do, because it's brilliant. My mum and dad, mum's a bus driver, my dad's a delivery man, and he also has a takeaway that whenever I go to get a free curry, he genuinely makes me work for him and do deliveries. And they're proper jobs. We're not doing proper jobs. We're telling stories. How lucky are we to get to do that? And that's why 4 a.m. looking through my notebooks is anything but a chore. It's exciting. And the Wiltshire Gazette and Herald was in an old cottage, so it looked like I was just going into a house. But it still felt to me like it was the centre of my universe. It was really exciting. And... I'll show you some of my front pages in a bit. So, be an enthusiast wherever you end up in your journalism careers. And I know that Harry was here earlier on, and he's still enthusiastic. He's, what, 142? And he's still... Don't tweet that, Dean. He's incredibly enthusiastic, and don't lose that, because I think that's the one thing that can separate you from... There are people, unfortunately, there are some people that want to come into our industry because they want to be on telly or they want to be famous. They should not come into our industry. They should go on Big Brother. They should do something else, because that's not what our industry is about. It's about telling stories. It's not about telling our own stories all the time. It's about telling other people's stories. So be enthusiastic about those stories. Oh, I got all passionate there. Didn't expect that. So, it's 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm literally working. I'm not literally working 24 hours a day, but there wasn't a single hour of the day that I wasn't in the office, and I loved it. It was amazing. You know what it's like, Lisa, on a weekly paper. That's just what you do. At the end of that year, a job came up, and I was so excited because I got to go to the bright lights of Swindon. The Swindon Evening Advertiser, which wasn't the Times and it wasn't the Guardian, but it was a much bigger paper. And all of a sudden I had 24 other journalists that I was working with. And I stayed excited. I kept finding the stories. Now, there is a bit of a shorthand that I'm going to use here, and I said this in a lecture like this a couple of years ago, and some girl rolled her eyes. So I apologise ahead of time, but the thing that helped me move my career on was that I won a few awards for my journalism. But what's much more important than winning the awards was how I got to them. So in Swindon, there was a problem with travellers. And I said to my news desk one day, we keep writing about travellers and about the mess that they leave and burnt out caravans and all that, but I've never actually seen an interview with a traveller. And my news desk said, yeah, we've tried a couple of times, but you know, we've had photographers beaten up and stuff, so we just don't tell those stories. And my sense of social justice was inflamed, and I thought that was wrong. Because we're telling people stories, we should be getting a balanced view. So, even though I was expressly forbidden to do so, one Saturday I did a shift and I got a pool car, and I went on my own to a traveller's camp. And my theory was, I don't exactly look threatening, do I? I didn't used to be 6 foot tall. I've always been a little lad. So I thought, well, I'm just going to go in, and hopefully the fact that I'm not threatening will at least get me through the door. So I arrived, and about 7 lads came around the car, and I thought I was going to get battered. And I saw this girl, and just very quickly I was able to just kind of, you learn stuff. I made a connection with her, and she literally saved my arse that day. And so I got the story. I got the story with the travellers, an exclusive story. We also, and this is much more serious stuff, we also, I went to a charity thing, and they were talking about teenage prostitution, and it really hit home with me. Now, I could have very easily gone back and written a piece about Bernardo's and all the work they were doing with teenage prostitution, and there were some really powerful stories there. But it really impacted on me, and I wanted to do something about this. So I started writing about prostitution in Swindon. And again, this is a massive shorthand, I kind of became known for it. And because I built contacts and I built trust with people, journalism as a contact sport, learned that on day 2, and I can't tell you how true that is. I built contacts and I built trust. I ended up doing lots of interviews with, for example, teenage prostitutes, and hearing some really harrowing stories. That I have 2 little sisters, and I was living away from them, and I'm very close to them, and it was breaking my heart hearing these stories. And it's a painful thing to do, to go on death knocks and listen to people tell you about their 14-year-old kid. But you have to remember that as a journalist, we're there to tell their stories. And if they want to tell those stories, we are the conduit. We give them such power. When I had a really good success rate with death knocks down in Swindon, and I could never understand it. Because I used to think, if someone knocked on my door, if a family member was killed, I'd tell them to fuck right off. But they'd always invite you in, and you were given, and I felt quite complex about it by the end, but you're giving them the power to tell their stories, and that's what we do as journalists. Anyway. So I was doing lots of stuff on teenage prostitution, and then we found out there was a brothel operating near a school. So I grew up reading Maz and Mahmood. I went undercover in a brothel, and I made my excuses and left. It was amazing. And I was mic'd up, and we had a photographer around the corner, and And so stuff like that. So there is opportunity in every newsroom that you're in. You can write about the travellers, or you can write about the teenage prostitution, or you can see an opportunity to do something that will, and I sound like a knob saying it, but will make you stand out and will help you win awards. And the reason awards are important are because of what happened next in my story. And there is a lesson here. Right. So we're all journalists. Drinking. I'm not sure what the rule is about drinking, but I imagine there is one. I'll just tell you my story about drinking. So I go to these awards. I think I was up for, I think it was Young Journalist of the Year. I won a few for those stories that I told you about. And they're a massive piss up. And the ones, when we used to have them back in, I guess it was 2000, you'd start drinking very early in the day. I was still down in Swindon, and as exciting as Swindon is, I really still wanted to get back home. And I was trying to find a way into the Yorkshire Post. And I found out that the YP and the Yorkshire Evening Post, which is important, were up for awards. Excuse me. So, I seek out the table with the Yorkshire Post lot on, and I find the news editor of the Yorkshire Evening Post, a guy who was called David Helliwell. And so I got talking to him, and he was from Keighley, which is where I'm from. And about an hour later, all I could remember was that he was from Keighley. So I kept going up and saying, I kept calling him Keighley because I couldn't remember his name. And I was essentially going, here's my award. What do you reckon, Keighley? So like I said, I don't know what the rule is about drinking. But 2 days later, my hangover had gone, and I rang the Evening Post, and I said, hi, I don't know if you remember me. And Dave Helliwell went, I remember you. And somehow he invited me for an interview. Okay, so I've got another lesson about research, and you've probably heard a very different lesson from all the proper people that teach you. However, I cannot tell you, I've done lots of, because I became the arts editor and because of my radio show, I've interviewed lots of famous people. I haven't always researched those famous people. You should research, I'm sure. However, I think we can get hung up sometimes on thinking we know what the story is before we go in, and we stop listening. And a colleague of mine, to this day, is a very experienced colleague, is a brilliant writer, writes down his questions, and it's just so, it just seems illogical to me that you're going to meet a human being and you want that human being's story, and the last thing you need to be doing is going, so tell me about your dead son. And they say, he was an avid parachute jumper. How old was he when he died? I just think that's weird. So what I would probably say, and I have come a cropper, no I haven't actually, I've got away with it every time. What's probably the most useful thing to do is do your research, but then put it in your back pocket. And don't forget that we're storytellers and we're there to hear a story. So what's the best way to ask someone for a story? It's not to sit there with a list of questions. But again, like I say, you might hear something very different. You probably should do research. I do sometimes do research. I didn't do research before my interview that Dave Helliwell offered me. And I came up here for an interview, and it was incredibly exciting because I was finally, oh God, and I walked into the old building of the Yorkshire Post, which none of you will ever get to do now, which is a damn shame. But it had this huge glass ceiling, and it was enormous. It was, I'd arrived as far as I was concerned, so I get to the interview, and Neil Hodgkinson, was it Hodgkinson? The editor at the time, said, why do you want to work for the Yorkshire Evening Post? And I went, you mean Yorkshire Post? And I thought I was being interviewed for the Yorkshire Post. I'd never heard of the Yorkshire Evening Post. When I told my dad I had a job at the Yorkshire Post, Evening Post, he said, isn't that the free one? We didn't get I grew up in Keighley, so I didn't know what the Yorkshire Evening Post was. So the other rule is, think on your feet. So I went, oh yeah, sorry, no, Yorkshire Evening Post. Looking around the room going, fucking hell, that's not the Yorkshire Post on the walls. So, yeah, and I got the job. It's ridiculous, I know. They must have had a quota to fill or something. So I arrived, I think it was 2000, it was just after the September the 11th attacks, because I was down in Swindon doing that, another really emotional day that I won't tell you about now. So I arrive in Yorkshire, and I'm just a news reporter, but it was amazing to be competing with brilliant journalists. I still think Tony Harney is a legend. People like Bruce Smith and Dave Bruce, which might be names that you don't know, but they were legends of journalism. I'm sitting there with people that reported on the Yorkshire Ripper. And again, I was excited, I was enthusiastic, and I was really eager to learn from these people. When you go into newsrooms, I guess now, there might not be quite so many experienced journalists around, which is a real shame. But you know what? You can find them on Twitter and you can befriend them, and they're brilliant. I love drinking with journalists more than anything else in the world, because the stories that they all have, are amazing. So I'm competing for the front pages, and I got a few, and it was great. And someone sent an email out saying, does anybody want to do a review at the West Yorkshire Playhouse? Now, back in Wiltshire, I should probably write all this down. There's going to be a timeline that makes logical sense at some point. Back in Wiltshire, because I was the big fish in the small pond, I got to do everything. I got to do theatre reviews. I got to do restaurant reviews. I even did a couple of film reviews, just because I wanted to. And it meant when this email came around asking if anyone was up for doing reviews, I was keen to do it. I've always been into theatre. It's always been a big love of mine, and so I was able to do it. You get those opportunities in bigger newsrooms like that. So I started doing reviews, and I could see that the people doing them at the time, essentially, this is being broadcast, isn't it? Please don't tweet this. Some of my colleagues liked getting free tickets, but they weren't necessarily in love with theatre in the same way that I was. Fair? Yeah, okay. So I saw an opportunity, I saw an opening, and I said, look, I do know a lot about theatre. Maybe I can make this part of my role, or just start doing more of it. And my news editor said, no, you're a news reporter, fuck off and get some stories. So what I did was strike a bargain, which was, I'd do my 8 till 4, and then my time was free, but could I then write reviews and stuff? So I started doing it a lot more regularly. And then a few months later, I went to see the editor and said, look, my reviews kind of appear sporadically. Maybe we can do a weekly thing. And it was Nicola Meggs, and she at the time said, well, it's funny you should say that. We're actually looking at starting an art supplement, and as you've come to me, maybe you want to be involved in it. So that's how I became the accidental editor of the first art supplement that we had. And again, that thing of just looking for the opportunities and putting yourself out there. The problem was, Gillian, who I love and is mad as a bag of fish, she's mental. Like, I think she's actually mental, but a brilliant news editor, said, you're still a news reporter. So what I ended up doing was working 8 till 4, and then at 4 p.m, starting editing the arts magazine that we were publishing. I was once at the Playhouse, finished watching a show, I did have a glass of wine, went and threw up in the toilets and went back to the office because I was just knackered, but I did that for 6 months. And Caroline, you've got this weird look on your face, like, why were you doing that? But that's, to be honest with you, I saw that look on lots of my colleagues' faces, and it was a look that I saw when I started doing radio as well, and I will come back to that. But for me, I don't understand why there's any confusion. It's the best job in the world. I get to go to the theatre, and then I got to go back to the office and write about it. That is brilliant. And I was living with my dad in Keighley, so I'd get home at like 2 a.m. and then be up at 7 to get back in. But it was exhilarating. If you want a life, then that's fine. No, and I say that quite flippantly. And I did hear once a journalist talking about the fact that you can't have personal relationships and your marriage will fail and all this, and that's nonsense. It is a job that you can do it if you want to do a shift and go home. I'm sure that's possible. It is a job that kind of demands a lot of your attention. You just have to find the right person that's up for sharing you with their job. And I can't imagine, if, by the way, if you're good at anything else, or if you're not desperate to be a journalist, go do something else, because you're not going to make any money, and it will absolutely sap you. The reason I'm standing here doing this is because I can't do anything else. I probably could. I reckon I'd be dead good at running a business. It'd be something else I could do, but I can't not be a journalist. I can't not tell stories. It's something that I'm sure we all share in common, that we've got burning inside of us, that we want to do. Where the hell was I? So, the Yorkshire Post comes up with a job advertisement for the Arts Correspondent, and everybody wanted this job. I'd been working for the Yorkshire Evening Post by accident for 4 years. I really wanted to get to the YP. And pretty much everyone applied for it. So a lot of my colleagues applied for the job as well. And the thing that I was able to do when I went into the interview was take with me a stack of the Arts magazine that I'd been editing for 6 months. And so when everyone was looking at me quizzically, kind of going, why are you doing this for no money? Why are you doing this in your spare time? It was because I could go into that interview and just know that I'd nailed it, because nobody else had been editing that magazine for 6 months. So yeah, do you know what? The EP, I'm sure it's quite exploitative that they got that out of me for 6 months without paying me extra for it. And I didn't miss a deadline for any of the new stuff. But ultimately, it helped me. And that's why that quizzical face that I saw, honestly, so many of my colleagues were asking me why I was doing it. And they were getting pissed off on my behalf that I wasn't being paid for it. But I knew that, first of all, it was an end in itself. It's brilliant to get to do that, but also I felt it might lead somewhere. I'm going to fast forward through the next 10 years because I became the Arts Correspondent. And I kind of applied that same enthusiasm that I've always had. But this was now amazing, because news is cool and everything, but I had done one too many death knocks, and, you know, court was fine. And I actually did a court case about a month ago because someone that I know was involved. And it was brilliant to be back in court again. But my real passion was for the arts. And to do it day in, day out. And I was going through the box of stuff at my dad's. And I've looked at some of the people that I've interviewed and some of the interviews I've got to do. And it's just really cool. It's really exciting. It's great fun. And I haven't lost that. It was 10 years that I did the job. I've got a little tip for you. 10 years that I did the job, and I never once lost the enthusiasm for it. I was Arts Correspondent for a really long time. Excuse me. But I was editing a thing called Culture that we have on a Friday. What happened? This is, okay, so take from this story what you will. An editor left, and I was kind of like, I'm getting a bit annoyed actually, because I edit this magazine, but I'm still being paid as a correspondent. And I want to get paid as an editor. So when the old editor left, I started changing my byline to arts editor because I was editing the magazine. So I just changed my byline. So when the new editor came along, I said, you know that I'm the arts editor, I'm paid as a correspondent. So I got paid as an editor, so that was nice. I don't know if there's anything you can take from that story. So there is this other strand to my work that then started happening, which is probably less relevant to you guys, but I started writing for theatre, and that got me into TV and stuff. But the thing that is relevant to you is that after about 8 years of doing it, it wasn't like I could do it with my eyes shut or I was bored or anything like that. I was still really excited to be doing all the stuff that I was doing. But I just felt that I'd got to a point where I kind of wanted to do some more stuff. And here's a tip for you. Be an expert. As well as being an enthusiast, try to be an expert. Now, you can be an expert in news, absolutely. I became an expert in the arts. There's so much scope for us to do different stuff. If you, a friend of mine's just been made politics reporter at the Evening Post, and she loves politics. She was consumer editor for a couple of years, but she always wanted to do politics. So you have got an amazing opportunity to decide now which bit of journalism you want to go into. And being an expert in news is equally valid. There's some brilliant newsmen. Charlie Heslett, who should be here. Yeah, you've got one for the price of two. Sorry, Charlie's not here. He's in Leeds bus station at the minute. He's a brilliant newsman, but he's an expert in news. And I'm sure he'd tell you the same thing. He'd probably say like this, be an expert in news. No. Anyway, that's only for you, Lisa. So, about 3 years ago, on Twitter, I met Rosina Breen, who's the editor of BBC Leeds. And we just kind of got talking. She'd seen some of my articles. They'd asked me to go in a couple of times to talk on the radio. And when I went into the radio studio, I was like, this is kind of cool, actually. I enjoy this. So I said to her, look, can I have a meeting? And I went for this meeting and said, I'm an arts expert here in Yorkshire. There's no one else really doing my job. Would you like to make more use of me? And just offered myself to her, really. And she came up with this slot from 9:30 till 10 every Saturday, which I did for about a year. And that same quizzical face specifically from someone who's doing a similar job to me on a very close newspaper, said one night, do they pay you? And I said, no. And he said, And it's every Saturday. I said, yes. He said, why the hell are you doing it? And I realised that he didn't get it, and that was fine. I knew why I was doing it, and no, I wasn't doing it for the money. Do not go into the radio for the money either. I was doing it because I'd found something else that I loved, and every Saturday, getting up at 9 a.m, and I am a journalist, so I was generally quite pissed on a Friday night, at night was just brilliant. Just the same exhilaration I used to feel being in the Wiltshire Gazette and Herald, and it was something new and something exciting. And I did this for, I did this for maybe a year and a half, before I've kind of felt confident enough to say to them, you've now got a year and a half free work out of me, a bit of quid pro quo. What can I get out of this? I'm quite keen to be on the radio. And so the quid pro quo was they made me a demo, and they listened to the demo, and then on Valentine's Day 2 years ago, I did my first radio show. I sat in for someone, and it was a whole new world. Except it wasn't. It was exactly the same. It was listening to people and listening to stories, and maybe sharing a little more of myself and telling more of my stories. But it was the thing that I hear about me. The editors often tell me I'm good with callers. The phrase they use is they like talking to you. And what that means is when people ring, I've been interviewing people for 15 years, and it's all, and by the way, it's all an act. We are journalists. Alan Bennett told me. Alan Bennett talked about being the teddy bear with a knife of steel inside him, and you never see him coming. And he used, he used the C word with me once, and it was amazing. But he said to me, you won't be able to write this in the Yorkshire Post. And I went, yes, I will. And then he told me this story that relies very heavily on the C word as a punchline. And I was like, you bastard. But they never see you coming. So actually, if you've, I did a talk here last week and no one had heard my radio show, so I'm not going to embarrass myself again. If you've heard my radio show, I might come off as a bit of an idiot. I'm kind of playing around, and I'm being quite spontaneous, and things are going wrong. It takes so much preparation for it to sound that chaotic, and for me to sound like I don't know what I'm doing, so that people are comfortable talking to me, is 15 years of experience. They never see me coming, and it goes back to the travel thing. I know myself. I know that I'm, little chubby Nick who's a bit of a laugh, and so I can get in and get those stories. But find the thing that's unique about you that will make people want to talk to you. It's about telling people stories. So again, real shorthand. My shows were going well that I sat in on, and I got my own show, and it's brilliant, and I love doing it. So now I have what I believe is called a portfolio career. So I still keep the Yorkshire Post stuff doing, and there's a TV writer who's a mentor of mine, and I met a friend of hers, and it really gets on my nerve. People keep asking me this. They keep going, I don't know how you fit it all in. And I find that a really frustrating question now, because the answer's really simple. I love every aspect of what I do. I still write for the Yorkshire Post. I think I'm calling myself theatre correspondent these days on my byline. I'm presenting stuff on the radio. I write stuff for TV, and I write stuff for theatre. And when people ask me how you do it all, I don't understand the question. I do it all because I'm so lucky to get to do the job that I love to do. And the fact that I pursued all these different things in my career means that there are lots of doors open to me. But you're at the beginning, and those doors will be open to you. You do have to, it's something that I know that you've heard earlier this week, and it's a bit trite, but it's incredibly true. It is true that the harder you work, the luckier you will get. It just is. But you're in an amazing place to get into wherever it is you're going and create your own opportunities. It's an amazing world. Journalism is brilliant. Lisa was asking me on the way in this morning, which is my favourite. 2 years ago, I discovered radio. Radio is my best thing. A couple of weeks ago, I presented the Sunday breakfast show, and then I was on presenting the Asian show later on at night. And the editors realised they'd double booked me, and they'd offered to basically cancel the shift. And I was like, why would you do that? So I went to sleep on Saturday. I got up at 4 a.m, presented a show, went home, went to sleep, got up, went back and presented a show. And I can't think of a better way to spend my day. Oh, I did have a Yorkshire Post deadline in the middle as well. But that's fine, because that's brilliant. And I love radio. I won't ever, I think, give up my Yorkshire Post stuff or my other journalism. it's an amazing world with so many amazing opportunities. It will be down to you to make of it what you will, but you're at the start and it's all out there. And it's an amazing job. Enjoy what you're going to do.
I'm assuming you'll get questions.
Okay. No questions, please.
I've got one.
Yes, Richard.
The idea of combining not so much radio and newspapers, but the idea of combining your arts work when you're writing serious plays that go on at the Theatre Mill in Bradford, and also writing Emmerdale, which is a very different style but also requires a different mindset, and then doing journalism. I've always thought that journalists are people who kind of hammer words into shape on an anvil, and artists are people who craft them lovingly into works of beauty. So how do you combine those two styles?
That's a really good question. When I was writing my first Emmerdale episode, I was having a really tricky time with it. I couldn't get my head around something. So I agreed to go and do an interview with Tim Bresnan, the Yorkshire cricketer, and then I came back and I just knocked out this YP piece. It was like a 1,200-word interview. And then went back, and it took me about 3 days to write 2 pages of Emmerdale. So they are really different mindsets, really different ways of working. I find the journalism much easier, but what that's a brilliant reminder of is that in 15 years' time, hopefully the TV writing will be much easier. Because I only find journalism easy because I've been doing it 15 years and I know how to do that. There's a thing that you often get told in creative writing, and if anyone does any kind of creative writing, you will have heard this. And it is write what you know, which is nonsense. What they actually mean is write your take on the world. And what I realised, preparing for this lecture, because I did prepare, was that the reason I've been able to write some of the stuff that I've written is because of my 15 years of journalism. Write What You Know isn't about writing your stories, it's writing the stories that you know. And I've spent 15 years sitting in courtrooms and going to inquests and knocking on doors, and so those stories are the ones that I'm able to tell. I've got quite a big pool of stories to tell. So I don't think that answers your question at all. But I don't know. I just switch my head. My theatre stuff is very self-generated, so I feel like if there's something I want to say about the world, then it goes into a theatre piece. If I want a load of money, I'll write TV. Answer all.
Anything else for that? Have you got any tips for radio presenting?
I feel really. They just sent me to presenter school. Like I've been presenting 2 years, and they sent me to presenter school last week. I think the biggest tip. Okay, so I'll tell you what. When I did my demo, my producer's a brilliant guy called Andy, and so he said he'd do my demo, and I went into the studio with him, and I prepared this thing, and I said, "Hi, I'm Nick Ahad. You may have heard me on Box versus Stalls." And he stopped recording, and he looked at me, and after about 10 different takes, he was. He said, "Right, we're going to do it again." And it was literally, I think it was late at night. Andy was really fed up. About 10 takes in, I just went, "Fucking it, right, fine, yeah, it's Nick, BBC Radio Leeds," and he went, "Right, that's why we want you to present, because of who you are." So I think my biggest tip for radio presenting, and really I'm like a baby when it comes to radio presenting, is be yourself. So find the thing that's unique about you. I genuinely didn't know that I have a strong accent until I went on the radio, honestly, and it transpires that my accent's like a big part of me. So there's this amazing thing, the brilliant thing they showed us at presenter school, because you are told to be yourself, but then if I was being myself, I'd go on the radio and swear a lot, and what it actually is if you take 100% of you, and let's say there's 20% that you don't share on the radio, but 80% of you that you do, you have to make that 80% 100% of who you are on the radio. So find the things about you that are unique, find your own voice, and capitalise on that, I think, yeah. And do you know what? Have you been in touch with Radio Leeds? Get in touch and say, "Can I come and review your newspapers?" Listen to the station. That was a big thing. My very first day in journalism, my editor said, "What papers do you read?" And I said, "Don't really read newspapers." Don't say that ever. ever. Research. So if you want to be on, if you want to be on Radio 1, listen to a lot of Radio 1. Get in touch with them. But yeah, find your voice and be unique. Yes, mate.
Were you a fan of soaps before you started writing for Emmerdale?
Is it? I plead the 4th or the 5th. They say in America. Yeah. It's good as Emmerdale's brilliant. No, actually, all right. So when I started watching it, I have massive respect for soap writers. Genuinely, Shakespeare wouldn't have been writing soaps if he was alive today, which is a nonsense thing that people say. But not everyone can do it. It's a really hard work. Of all the things I do, it is by far and away the hardest. I do watch TV. I've spent 10 years at the theatre, so I kind of have maybe 2 nights free a week, if that. So I watched sort of bits and pieces. The short answer to your question, which you probably realise, is no, not really. But once I started watching them, I have massive respect for them. And I think it's a very hard medium to work in. Do you watch the soaps? All right. Oh, okay, cool. The producer at Emmerdale started at the Archers. I've never listened to it. I don't get it. Yes, Dean. I'm sorry, I thought.
Are you going to tell them about the catch that I took to dismiss you in that league match?
Dean has this dream. We played cricket against each other, and he thinks he took a catch to get me out. I don't ever remember that happening.
No, actually, there was a genuine reason for the question. How do you find time to play cricket, given that you're doing all those other things that you just...
Yeah, no, cricket's a ball ache. I've been playing for 23 years for Airedale. There's a thing that happens with Emmerdale. I can't possibly explain the whole process, but in the time that we've got. But it's a month cycle. So every Friday, once a month on a Friday night at around about 3 a.m. you get your storylines, which is a 200-page booklet that tells you what's going to happen in the month. You then have until Monday morning to take that booklet, take your episode and structure it. So I've actually committed the cardinal sin and dropped out of cricket twice this year. It is really hard. And I'm not saying it's easy to kind of cram everything that I do into one particular lifetime. But, I think you have to, and it's important as well, because I can't just go on the radio and talk about writing for newspapers or writing for Emmerdale. You have to have a life as well, which why I was saying, being flippant earlier about dedicating your life to it, you have to go out and have some life experience. One of the biggest things that I've been, so there's 2 other, I won a couple of other awards for writing. But once I'd written these articles, I sort of knew that they were going to win me some awards, because they were about going to Bangladesh, and my dad's from Bangladesh, and I went back and I was 30 years old, and it was this really big moment, and I wrote 2 magazine articles, and it was a really big moment for me to write about that, but that was my life experience and my unique take on the world, and I knew that was something that no one else could have written. So you do have to go and have a life as well. Despite this may go against everything I've said for the last hour, don't just think about journalism, do other stuff as well. Theology, turns out, was actually a really good degree for me to have done, because I know a lot about religions and that. So I can talk to people about that. Get some life experience. And no, I don't remember the catch.
Well, Nick's obviously a very busy man, so we thank you very much for coming in.